everybody. How we doing? Good. Excellent. It is my genuine pleasure to get to bring us home on the last keynote for today. I'll do a brief introduction in a little bit, but to introduce the talk as a whole, to give a little bit of a framework, obviously we're going to be having a panel talk afterward, and there are two incredible people who I'm going to be sitting alongside. So more than anything, what I would like to frame the next 15 minutes as is going to be mostly explaining to you all why everything those two say is absolutely correct. Everything I'm going to be talking about is related to the idea of what school and universities and colleges are dealing with at both a secondary, but particularly at a post-secondary level, with a better understanding of how to interface, drive, work with, or create content with those entities. There's a great idea that came to me that hit me watching the last panel, which is the idea of the difference between integrative and positional bargaining. Integrative bargaining is the goal we should all aspire to. Positional bargaining is the idea that you have two people who are purchasing a car from another person. You both have a goal for a price point. Everybody's adversarial. Everybody has what they want, and they're battling to get what they want. Integrative bargaining, you can probably guess, is where everyone comes together with an integrative, agreeable goal in mind where everybody benefits. So my hope by the end of this is that you guys all have a better understanding of how to drive integrative bargaining and discussions with school institutions or other nonprofit institutions in your area and understand better the pressures they're under. Because if you can understand what they need to solve and the problems they have, it will be much easier to drive the content that you want with them as well. To give you guys a little bit more of a framework of what's going on, when we talk about universities these days, many are developing laboratories. They're developing server farms with the intention of getting into things like AI, and they're building things like new school facilities, varsity facilities, and a whole number of other things, with the intentional and direct goal of driving more student recruitment. And we'll talk about why that is in a second, but what if I told you there was a better way? And what if I told you that you're never gonna guess what it is? Yes, I'm biased. It's this thing called video games. Esports represent an incredible opportunity for driving recruitment into universities and meeting a lot of the goals that many universities are battling with in the modern context. A lot of the challenges that they have, a lot of the needs that they fight for are met through that recruitment. And I'm going to talk to you guys about how you can talk to schools to better drive that recruitment or to help them understand why this is such a useful tool. One of the biggest challenges that we have when we talk to schools and we talk about recruitment is this chart here. This is the overall growth in Twitch viewership over the last few years, over the last decade or two, since Twitch has first started. When we talk to schools about recruitment, when we talk to schools about building into esports and other varsity content, often what we do is we try to get them excited. We try to sell to them. We try to get them hyped. So what we do is we talk to them about that really cool gold bar, that really cool gold graph, because it's going to get them excited. What the gold bar is the year by year, month by month, peak viewership on Twitch. That is the moment that had the highest views over the course of that month, which usually means a major esports event, a global esports event, or some other major moment that was happening on Twitch. Something like Games Done Quick for charity. Here's the thing. The reality is the purple graph. The purple graph is the average viewership on Twitch. What many people are doing when they are talking about the gold graph to a place like an educational institution is they are not being honest. They might be telling the truth, but it is a sensationalization, because unless you can guarantee to that school that you are going to give them the biggest event of the year, then that gold graph isn't true. It is much better when you talk to schools to talk to them about the purple graph, because the very first thing they're going to do when you walk out of that room is they're not going to believe that number you gave them, and they're going to go and look things up. And what they're probably going to see is the purple graph and not the yellow one. All of this is important to understand, because when we talk about schools and we talk about what they're facing, they're looking for recruitment on both sides, and they're looking to bring in gamers from across the spectrum. And when we talk about major events, we're talking about a lot of esports events, which are, as many people talk about, predominantly male activities and are targeting people who are 35 years and under, but are not as predominantly male as you might have imagined. According to the Entertainment Software Association of Canada, it's a 62 to 38% split at the moment. The trend over the years has been gaining towards the 50-50. So this is an activity that has a lot of potential and is increasingly co-ed and is in a demographic that is directly targeting what universities and colleges are after. Young adults, 35 and under, students. All of this is particularly important now in terms of recruitment. Why are we warning about this? Why are we fighting for this? Because schools need students. Putting this purely and subjectively within the experience of the province in which I've operated for many years, this is a statement from the Council of Ontario Universities. Simply put, over the next few years, universities are projecting massive financial losses. These are obviously distributed over all of the universities in Ontario, so the impact per school is not remotely this high, but cumulatively it is significant. These schools need good answers and they need them immediately. And for most schools and most universities and most colleges, and I say this to anybody who's worked with a university or college, you know this, it doesn't get solved in a month. A solution to a problem that occurs now takes a year to 4 years to manifest. And so you need to be presenting solutions to them that they're going to have reliable approaches to and are going to be able to trust will be deployable within the next 2 to 3 years, because the problem is coming within the next 2 for them. And this is something I've had to deal with many times. Hi, I'm Geoffrey LaChapelle. I'm an educator, I'm a documentarian, I'm a content creator. I've worked for many years in the esports and video game space. Originally, I was a hardcore player for Halo 3, where I was a ranked 50 player, and I've been a national competitor for Magic the Gathering as recently as 3 months ago when I played in Ottawa at Magic the Gathering Nationals. But more importantly, I've worked at multiple school institutions. I was one of the founding partners that helped build the Humber College esports program before COVID. And when COVID came, I went to go get my master's degree and then go on to build the program with Toronto Metropolitan University. Some of the other content that I've worked on over the years, hyperlinks are a problem. There we go, cool. All right, some of the projects that I've had a chance to work on over the years include some incredible documentaries like The Artists, which is a long-form documentary about the entire history of the North American video game design world. That is the original chainsaw from Doom, which was one of the most unhinged interviews I've ever had the privilege of being in. Tom Hall is an absolute gem, and I was grateful he was willing to sit down with us. This documentary won a Canadian Screen Award for how we looked at many different vectors in video games and design, many of which aren't necessarily appreciated. For example, one of the episodes we did was about Danny Bunton, the first transgender video game programmer in the world, who was making some of the most influential multiplayer games ever created, foundational games like Mule. As a consequence, I've spent a lot of time working as what I jokingly call a translator that speaks nerd, and having to convey all of that information to many groups, colleges, universities, city institutions, things like the CRTC, and get them to understand what needs to happen within the video game industry, within the esports industry, for it to be successful. All of that has culminated in the work that has happened at the current school in which I teach, Toronto Metropolitan University, where I teach in the undergraduate media school, the Masters of Business, and the Masters of Digital Media. During our time there, a colleague of mine who I've worked with for many years, first at Humber and now at TMU, he and I worked together to build what is now many major institutions in the school, most prominent of which is the Red Bull Gaming Hub, a 36PC video game design hub and multiplayer competition space. It is an event space that has actually hosted several of the people who are in this building right now, and is an incredible space to do classes out of, to run our varsity program out of, and to host community events. This space was built with the very generous help from both Red Bull and AMD. And to get the school to the point where they were willing to let Red Bull and AMD come in and renovate a localized classroom environment to turn it into this, when it used to be a very dry computer lab for doing music production, video editing, and the like, and to allow it to be this high-tech, NDI-enabled, broadcast-enabled competition space that our varsity students take over in the evenings, took approximately 3.5 years to achieve. And that was with enormous buy-in from all of the people at play. As a consequence of that, the school's culture in esports and video games exploded, culminating in a group called Overactive Media, who run many major esports teams, including Toronto Ultra, Toronto Defiant, and the Mad Lions out of Europe and League of Legends, hosting multiple of their international events out of the Mattamy Athletic Centre, the original home of the Toronto Maple Leafs, which is under stewardship with TMU. And the space has hosted multiple CDL majors, and it also hosted the final Overwatch League event that ever happened. There's a weird melancholy of getting to see Toronto Metropolitan University in the corner of the goodbye speech from all the casters of the Overwatch League. It's cool, but also hurts a little bit. Beyond that, we've also taken it into our own hands, working with groups like Destination Toronto, who you guys are going to hear from tomorrow, to work to bring in events ourselves to host. And so last year in July, we hosted the Mortal Kombat World Championships known as Final Combat, which used the TMU Theater and rebuilt it into a full spectator event where we had some of the best players in the world competing live on stage, including Sonic Fox, to play for the World Championship title, who eventually going to Sonic Fox in an absolutely, he's pretty good at the game. All of this is to say that these things are achievable, and they're achievable in reasonable amounts of time. But the key thing to understand is that what has to happen is the story of how those problems for the universities are solved quickly. Because even back in the time at Humber College, while the achievements were not on this scale, they were still pretty meaningful. We had a school that won some of the most prize money among the students, among any college or university at the time, and that money was kept by the students. We deployed one of the first scholarships in the history of Canada at Humber College at the time. And all of that meant that we were training players, many of who ended up being professionally scouted, and some of whom went on to play at either challenger level or beyond. All of that was possible because of belief and buy-in from the university. And so to understand how you talk to schools, you have to get them to understand where the value is coming from. It's much more important to talk to schools about where the sponsors are, where the money is coming from, what the categories are. Not because you need to tell them that they need to get involved with any major company, but to understand what the school specializes in, be it fashion, broadcasting, engineering, chemistry, whatever it is, there's certainly a company in these sectors that aligns. So find the alignments with your school to help them understand. Understand what the broadcasting power can be and the optics can be. Yes, major championships are bringing in viewership that rivals the spectatorship of major sports events, but also help them understand how the schools can also get access to eyeballs and what the scale that is reasonable for them to achieve is. What are the numbers that are happening with major esports organizations within places like Canada, like these, that can get eyeballs on your school's teams? Understand how your school can be involved with things like merchandising. If you're going to make jerseys for your team, can other students purchase them like they could with a traditional sports organization? This is something that is often not considered by many organizations, and schools are often allergic to this, but if they can get to the point where they understand, there's a lot of opportunity here. No different than buying a collegiate sports jersey for your college anyway. And beyond that, understand, like I said before, what the fit between both your school's opportunities are, as well as what your school's specializations are. This isn't just when it comes to sponsorships, this can also come to school talent. There are many ways for students to get involved. Going back to the panel that preceded this, they were talking at length about opportunities to get involved in tournaments, ways that you can get involved by being at events. There was ways that you can get involved in doing broadcast. If you can understand that your school is targeting broadcast, for example, like TMU, huge in the broadcast space, then you can help them understand that your students are being trained into doing events like Mortal Kombat, where the entire volunteer staff was TMU students, including several of whom were doing the live stats for a global tournament. we're shadowing the technical broadcasting team for a global tournament. When CDL comes to the school, when it came to school for multiple years in a row, the Challengers broadcast had TMU students on it. The crowd management was TMU students. A lot of the volunteer positions for things like Pokemon Nationals, the Overwatch League, and many other events, many of which are off campus in Toronto, are run by TMU student volunteers. All of this is because what you need to do is simply understand what your school needs, but also what your school is good at. And if you can find a way to activate this all, you can bring real value both into the city and to your school. This was a thought experiment that went down among some of the people within the city around if the largest events came to Toronto, all of them, this is the potential estimated economic impact that would come to the city. Any involvement that the school could have within that would have profound and tremendous value for the schools. And so it's really about, and this is where a lot of the conversation will likely be speaking towards, is if you can find the right way to position this, if you can find the right way to get your school, your nonprofit institution, whether it's post-secondary, secondary, or independent, to understand what is at stake and the opportunities you can reach, then there is tremendous potential value in this, both for what you can drive as well as what that school can bring forward to the betterment of not just the school, but to the students who have the potential to be part of these events like Valorant Masters Toronto, Get on My Level, the Overwatch League events, or conferences that come to the city, and can benefit their growth as well as students and future leaders and technical experts in the space. And I believe that's my time. Thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. I would like to welcome on stage now Shadi and Chris. Yeah. Okay, could I get a short, okay, you've introduced yourself, but could I get my other two panelists, please, to give maybe a quick intro of yourselves for those who might not know you?
That was incredible.
Yeah.
So this is going to be definitely a tough one to follow.
It's all to say you're right. That's it.
Yeah, great. That's great. My name is Chris Lamarucciola. Somebody asked me to say my full name on the panel today. They're recording it, so you can play that back. I'm the esports manager at Conestoga College. Previously, the co-founder CEO of Parabellum Esports. We were a professional Rainbow Six and Rocket League team. And now just recently announced the co-chair of the Waterloo Region Esports Commission. Just a very robust program at Conestoga right now. We're building a 10,000 square foot facility in our campus to go along with our programs. I'm sure we'll talk about some other stuff along here, but I don't want to take up too much time, so go ahead.
Lamarucciola. Okay. I'm Shadi Hanna. I am the instructor of esports business management at Bow Valley College. Previously, I've worked with a variety of varsity esports programs at the college level, including St. Clair Saints, Rio Red Storm, and the Keanu Huskies. And in my free time, which is a funny joke in esports, when I'm not teaching at Bow Valley, I run the Alberta Scholastic Esports League, which is a nonprofit provincial K-12 league for esports competitions for our junior high and high schools in the province.
Great, thank you all. My first question to start things off easy is, why did you choose to work in Collegiate specifically? We've had so many different people from different backgrounds come here today, and not all of them are interested or especially aware of the Collegiate Scholastic space specifically. So do enlighten us, please.
I'll say Collegiate kind of found me, which is interesting. I was developing courses for quite a few schools over time. Actually, the first course I developed was at Keanu, where I know there's some people in the room and you were at. Did some work with Algoma University and then through Seneca College, and then also did some development through Conestoga. And while I was teaching there, I was working actually as a brand. I was launching brands with content creators and celebrities. And I got a call from the athletic director, and he said, I heard you teach at our college and you have esports background. Would you like to put your name in the hat for the management position? I said, absolutely. They told me what the plans were with the arena and the teams and the media and all this stuff. And I said, been there, done that. I'd love to help build this up. It's a cool experience. And I kind of just, I ran with it. So my last frontier now. I'm done. I'm done after this.
I think for me, don't take this personally. I might be a little younger than some of my co-panelists here. I was in university at kind of we'll say the peak of collegiate esports development right around that 2019 era where TESPA had just kind of announced its shutdown. CSL was starting to merge with NACE. And I know these are just acronyms. So I promise we'll explain them later. But the point being is that there was kind of this big movement in Canada and the USA specifically to start formalizing collegiate esports. And so when COVID hit, I had the opportunity to go to a college esports program because that was a thing now in 2020. And from that, I just loved the space so much, I just never left. I'd be lying if I didn't admit that job security was an attractive component of collegiate. I think, the esports winter talk might have got to me a little bit at the time of the job search. There was a lot of concern around the tier one scene, the professional scene and whatnot. I'm happy I made the decision. I haven't looked back.
Absolutely. Revenge. When I was a student, I was playing competitively. It was back in the day when MLG was really big. And for those of you who aren't familiar, basically anyone under the age of 27, MLG was the first televised North American competitive esports league. And players would go on national television to compete for, kid you not, a Sonos speaker. So when my parents said, "Have you considered college?" I agreed, because at the time, it was not really a thing. There was huge programs of things like StarCraft in South Korea and other regions that were getting big in esports, but it wasn't really a thing for North America. And that was echoed going to school. When I started school in 2011, the same year that Twitch really took off. And you could see at the schools, there was a lot of interest from the students and no grasp among the school administrators, teachers at all in how this could be a thing. And so it's really about creating that possibility, what wasn't possible when I was a student, making sure it's possible for students that are doing stuff now.
That's really well put. Thank you. I guess this leads into my next question, because some of you have mentioned you have experience in esports and then brought that to collegiate, whereas maybe you had experience in teaching and whatnot and then brought that into collegiate esports from the other perspective. So how have you needed to adapt your skill sets and the things that you've been doing and your programs to differ from maybe like esports in general or just college and post-secondary in general?
I'll jump on this one first because my background, I've been gaming my whole life, but before I started working in esports, I tutored French. I worked in group homes as a mentor. I'd run like youth leadership camps. And so I had a very strong kind of teacher coaching mentorship background. And I think that really attracted me to the idea of coaching an esport team, so to speak, because that was what really got me before I ended up now in my role as an instructor. It was coaching, League of Legends rosters was kind of my big thing, and so that passion for just like taking something that you know and love and sharing that with others, I think adapted really well to esports. I think something you see a lot in the content creation space is people being good at games and just wanting to tell people, how to get better at games or just show off how good they are at games, whatever. But that idea of just sharing something you love with others, I think is what drives a lot of the really the revenue in this space. Truly is that sharing your passions, and so I think for me it was a very natural fit between education and competition.
Do you still do league coaching?
I do. That's a great question. I coach our Bow Valley Bears League of Legends team as well. We just made playoffs, so.
Oh yeah.
And so yeah, it's one more thing that I just add onto my agenda that I just don't have time for, but I love it so much I can't stop doing it. So.
That's great. I might have to ask you about that later after, Pat.
I got you.
Yeah, less from the esports side. I think the esports side, a lot of it comes from the coaching and development and the refinement process, the iterative teaching side of understanding more from mistakes than what comes from success and targeting where those mistakes can point to where you can improve. But a lot more of it came from documentary work. When you're doing documentary, when you're doing content like nonfiction content, it is really being an ambassador to take something that's objectively like theoretically weird or unorthodox and find a way to make it interesting and compelling and attractive to people who might otherwise not be interested or unwilling or have those preconceived notions, which is definitely something that I'm sure we've all had to deal with, is people who inherently write off what video games can be before the conversation even begins. It's that idea of, it's not about taking from zero belief to 100% belief. It's taking them from negative a million belief back to zero so that you can start teaching them what esports actually is.
Dealing with like what's happened over the last few years with this wave of what's going on. Yeah, definitely talking to students and the people who come into our space and just like actually being authentic about what has happened and what's shaped this industry over so much time. A backstory for me, just to kind of get into it, I had sold my company. Unfortunately, the company that purchased us decided they didn't want to invest in esports anymore. So I've taken all of this stuff and I've now brought it to my students. And I get the engagement on the fact that real things happen and they're not getting that from the traditional maybe program that was written by somebody who doesn't have the experience in the space. I have a great class retention, which is fantastic. And I mean, we've all lived different lives in this industry. Everyone here in the room today can probably tell a different story, but we're all here and we're all here for the same reasons, really. That's to learn, that's to grow the space together, and hopefully that will continue to drive us.
For sure. And I guess building off of that, how do you approach these discussions about, you know, going from that negative to like zero and then building that? Because obviously there's a huge pitch involved. I mean, from like my experience just running a collegiate club, like having to like say that a collegiate esports club, completely volunteer run, no real profits, is like something worth investing in.
Hey!
Yay! It's something worth investing in. How do we get there? And like how do you sell like collegiate esports and make it like worth investing in?
You take them to an event. That's it. There's so much built-in stigma that operates in a world where you don't necessarily understand that this is even possible. You understand that getting a great example is this past year, I was really lucky to get to go for the first time to IEM Cologne, which is this massive Counter-Strike event in Europe. 16,000 people fill that arena, which is a number that rivals any hockey game, any football game. It's crazy. And when you can show someone that, even a video that you took, because it's one thing to show them the video if it's the promotional live stream, because the person who's watching this, oh, they're just showing the best part. They're just focused on one part of the crowd. But if you're there and you're taking the photo, it lends, you're real because you're talking to them. It lends more power to that explanation, that photo, that experience. And if you can bring them to the tournament, it's a night and day shift. And that was a huge part of getting a lot of the change done at many of the spaces I've been in.
No further comments. Definitely, I'm going to continue with that. For me, it's been discussing that with like the stakeholders at our college and taking them to events, but taking them to other collegiate events and what's going on there. So it predates me, but the director and somebody else from our college had gone to Butler University when they opened their space to go see what it was and what the NACE convention was and all of these different things that was going on in the space. And that's when they really said, okay, we have something here. Other student testimonials, huge. So creating content with our students or anyone else's students who are here that can tell their story before, during, and after their time with the school, and just seeing also how that changes. So all of that. Events, we just had the panel. Events are why we're all here. So.
Yeah, I think I like the way you framed it in terms of like going from below zero to back to zero, because I think it's naive of us in the industry to assume that there isn't still a stigma. I think sometimes when we're in a bit of an echo chamber and we talk to other gamers and we come to events like this where everyone here loves esports and loves video games, it's really easy to kind of psych ourselves up to the fact that like gaming is cool for everyone, when sometimes that's just honestly not the case. You asked about collegiate. I'll interpret kind of specifically for the K-12 space. Gaming in schools is becoming a lot more popular. Nathan's here. You should go bug him. He's trying to hide in the middle of the crowd right now. We should go talk to him later about kind of the development around Canada. But what we're seeing is schools starting to appreciate gaming and esports, not for the same reasons as college programs and whatnot, not as a revenue generator per se, but as a way to engage students at school that otherwise have no interest in coming to class. Kids that just are so disconnected from their school community, kids that are suffering with mental health issues and depression. And so being able to tie in those like social emotional learning components has been really effective at the K to 12 level. And so, this was something you talked about in your keynote was, understanding the needs of the school or the institution that you're working with and associating the program benefits. And we've really leaned on that with our provincial programming. And to the point, I'll promise I'll keep it short, but when I was in Fort McMurray, one of the biggest hurdles we had was trying to get Valorant teams up and running in the schools, because school admin didn't want anything to do with first-person shooters in their schools, and they couldn't see past, the character with the cartoon gun in its hand, and it took a passionate 90-minute pitch at the superintendent's office with myself and 7 other teachers, a full-on presentation about, the ratings of the game, the diverse cast of characters, the benefits that players get by collaborating in a teamwork environment and all of that. And, 3 months later, we got our email, and now you have, Westwood Community High is one of the best Valorant teams in the continent, because they were given that ability to do that. And so it's about, convincing people, but not necessarily by convincing people that gaming is cool, but convincing people that the people that play games can become their truest versions of themselves through their activities and their passion.
For sure. No, I really like that. And I think like building off of that, it really is important that we address like the stigma, like face first, right? Because a lot of the people who we're pitching to outside of that just don't really understand that aspect, right? How do you address that fully, and like especially like even like not to the other stakeholders, but within the programs, how do you ensure that youth and other gamers are like really healthily and like socially and like emotionally, right, like in these environments and in these programs, like being the best that they can be?
Before I lose my thought, because I keep on doing that, you guys keep on rolling and you're saying great things. When it comes to the healthy aspect of things, we're actually about to host I think 150 kid Mario Kart event at our college, with the Waterloo Region Catholic School Board. So we have a big partnership with the Catholic School Board right now. Yes, the Catholic School Board. They love video games. There's 70 teachers right now that are teaching or have an aspect of esports within their program at the full K to 12 level. So we're doing the Mario Kart finals at our campus, 120 kids. And because we're part of athletics and rec, as like the way our chart works, we have now engaged all of the different, like the rec center, and I think we're doing a meal plan and all of the different things to bring, to remove the stigma from esports. So they're going to have an indoor recess period. There's going to be breakout sessions they're going to do yoga. They're going to do all the different things. We're going to try to sit them down for a PD lesson, but they're elementary kids and they're probably just going to want to go back to their Mario Kart event. But we're integrating our athletics and rec into the esports department. And because we're that family, it works well. So we'll see how it goes. It's next week.
Sounds fun.
On the topic of not making assumptions, I think we also have to stop assuming that just because college kids are adults means they know how to take care of themselves. In coaching collegiate esports teams, I've received Discord messages from students at 3:30 in the morning. I've seen kids show up at 8 a.m. with Red Bulls in their hand, and so like these are things that like you kind of have to, we love Red Bull in gaming, but maybe not at 8 in the morning. And so it's kind of like finding. For me, probably one of the biggest areas of growth for me as a coach is realizing that my role is not to necessarily teach people how to play video games better, but to teach them how to be the best versions of themselves that they can be, because a lot of the players that you work with are quite talented and are quite motivated. And even as students, right? Instructors, the students you work with are motivated and talented, but if they're not taking care of themselves and properly addressing those things and learning good habits, they suffer. And so part of that is, in a coaching environment is having, consistent and set and regular practice schedules, enforcing healthy bedtimes, nutrition. One of the cool things, we don't yet have it at Bow Valley, but I'd love to bring it over from what I used to do at Keyeno, was we had a really great mental health program where once a month our mental health I'm blanking on the proper title, but coaches or what have you on campus would meet with their teams and do guided sessions on things like sleep hygiene and emotional regulation and whatnot, and starting to actually treat it like a sport. We're going to call it esports. Let's be a sport, right? And, take good care of your mind, body, and soul. Definitely different approaches for the K-12 space, but I think at the college level for sure it needs to be intentional in your programming.
You cannot rationalize someone out of a position that they did not rationalize themselves into. If the stigma comes from a perception that is sociological, video games are bad, video games cause violence, like these things that have been proven time and time again to be false, if that is what they believe, they did not rationalize themselves into that position. And so you cannot go to them and say, well, video games don't make you violent, because their response is simply going to be, no, you're wrong. I know this to be a fact. And so the only way that you can work against a perception like that is to go around it. So you don't talk about how video games aren't violent. You don't show them studies about video game violence because they're not going to believe you. But what you do is you show them specific examples where video games are valuable. For example, there's a recent study that shows that Tetris, the old video game, if played within 48 hours of a traumatic event, has a significant impact on reducing the creation of PTSD symptoms, the formation of PTSD symptoms in that victim. In burn warts, there's a recent study that shows that putting anyone, but particularly children, in a VR experience where they are simulated to be in a cold winter environment, playing in a snow wonderland or things like that, they have a marked reduction in pain reporting in burn wart clinics. And a particular favorite of mine is to simply explain how much math a kid is doing when they play League of Legends. When you start breaking down, I have had meetings where I've sat a person down in a senior administrative role and sat them down and put a screenshot of the laning phase, the first 5 minutes of League of Legends in front of them. And then all I do is I point at the stats in the bottom left when you click on a character and you see how much damage their auto attack does, how much damage their ability does, the relative cooldowns on those characters' abilities, the delay between when the ability can be used and when the ability can be used again. And then you begin to look at their armor, a percentage mitigation of how much damage is dealt to that character is prevented, and their magic resistance, a percentage of how much damage from specifically abilities is received, is prevented. And then you explain that every single character in the game has different values for every one of these items. They have different health totals, and they have different resource pools, and there are 180 characters. And these kids are doing this math on the fly and intuitively. It is very hard to believe that League doesn't teach math after that.
I've never thought of it that way. Playing League before, or like Valorant or any other game, that's a really interesting way to pitch it.
There are 14-year-olds that are doing more complicated math than university students sometimes.
That's an interesting way to think about it, and I really like that. And so so when you're presenting it to them like this, do they really like buy into it right away? Does it take time? Like, how does the process go?
Normally, I tell them that this is the victory condition, is at the end of my rant, let's call it what it is, all they're going to do is sit back in their chair and go, and they usually do. Because what you've basically done is you've torn down a fundament of their understanding of the topic. So you've got to just let them sit in that and then let them decide how they want to proceed from there.
Light drop.
We're good.
No, yeah, that's really great. And you said, I know you mentioned in your keynote as well, that often these things really take time. And like you said, like sitting in it now, after you give them these presentations and these pitches, these things take time, even when they're considering it, even when you have the full force of the support. So how do you like maintain this like momentum with you as these things go on? And of course, like this is open to you both as well, not just with the people you're working with, like in the admin level, or even like when you're trying to bring Collegiate into other spaces, whether that's having students work elsewhere or intern or whatnot. Like how do you continue to push forward in that sense?
It actually goes back to the previous panel's discussion about reporting and KPIs. if you tell, if you get the belief, you earn the belief and you earn the buy-in, the people who are buying in need to see constant progress. They have to get affirmations, because if it's actually directly in line with what people were saying in the previous panel about the idea that the longer you take, I think it was Vince who said this, the longer you take to get back to them with the KPIs, the more they're going to have forgotten or have lost the connection to that moment where the event was great. If you get that buy-in and you get them to believe, well, now they're in, so you have to keep giving them updates to show that we're getting to that point, that it's working, that it's coming together, which isn't easy.
And it takes us as, let's call us project matter or experts, whatever we're going to call it, to continue to educate them as things are happening within the space. I am consistently inviting all of our executives to any event that we're hosting. I'm giving updates on the event that we're hosting. The Mario Kart one, we did an event with OC a few weeks ago for the Valorant Championships for the province. Anything, whether it's tiny or big, we're sending live streams just to show like what you guys are investing in and what we're about to build at this arena. There's a reason we're doing it. And then the additional now buy-in and the light bulb is, hey, our region's about to host the next Call of Duty champs. And, you know, some people are like, well, why Kitchener? And our whole region is invested in, from the K-12, the collegiate level. We have a esports commission in our region now. We're all bought in, and the president is like ecstatic about it. He's hopefully going to come to champs. We'll try to get him. He's an older gentleman, but I want to get him in the room and see it, because he was part of the vision and he was one of the champions behind it. So I'm excited to see where it goes, but you have to keep showing, and then also say like, maybe this KPI isn't a great KPI, but here's how we can adjust it to reach what you want to reach, and it'll come with time. But we also have to walk before we run, and some programs are sprinting and they don't know what they're doing and they have to revert back and make changes. But that's also the beautiful thing about the collegiate space, is we kind of can, and it resets every fall. So we have the summertime to reset, think about what we're doing, and try different things. But the worst thing that could happen is administration decides that they don't want to do it anymore, but we have to keep fighting for it. And I need you to come talk to some of the administrators.
I love that we started with this idea of KPI and reporting, because what I've found is often the most compelling is just regular progress updates, I suppose, like social media, LinkedIn presence, whatnot. I remember there was a period of time where when I was running the varsity program at Keyano, I would send a social media summary for the month, and I would text that to my boss, and then he'd send that to his boss and whatnot. I remember one time there was like a Canadian or Esports Canada power ranking thing that went out that had Keyano #1 in Canada, and the president of the college got it, and he saw me at an event like 2 weeks later, and he's like, "Am I right that we're the best Rocket League team in the world?" I'm like, "Okay, let's calm down, like a little." But they get really excited by that stuff, like having records of things and performance and whatnot, and just even any little tidbit that you can have. We went from being, for those of you that don't know Keyano, it's located in Fort McMurray, Alberta, which is a very, very small town, has a bit of a reputation for being an oil and gas town, not a place you'd expect to see premier world-class esports talent. And yet, during my tenure at the college, we had the 13th highest social media presence out of all collegiate esports programs in North America. And when you factor in that NACE at the time had 430 something members, that's a pretty significant milestone. And we did that just because I posted stuff. I'm not a social media marketer by any means. Like, I was on Canva grinding graphics. Like, that's you know what I mean? But that's all I did. Was when we would play a game, I would tell people, and when we would win a game or lose a game, I would tell people, and numbers just shot up. And so even little things like that make it go a long way.
Be present. Yeah. Be present. Make the posts. Do whatever you got to do. 100%. It only lasts on social media for 5 minutes or less in some cases, but there's a reason why I'm here today. I wanted to be present in the room, meet new people, talk about our programs, do all the things. So that's so key. Not that it really has to do with the question, but I just want to go off that.
I would also go off that and say, like, this is just sort of cumulative going off of, it's also really important to, even if you're the champion of it, like these are two guys who've done amazing stuff on this front, even if you're the champion of it, you need to elevate other champions. You need to be able to work with and support other people who are also trying to make that progress happen in your community, in your city, in your region. Well, like both Humber College and the progress we've made at TMU were not like a solo effort. This was supported immensely by some incredibly brilliant students who have driven both at Humber College and at TMU incredible growth long term. Both schools are incredibly competitive to this day, have kept the legacy. And even at an admin level, the conversations and the convincing doesn't just come from me. I've been very privileged to get to work with a brilliant person named Dr. Alexander, the video games professor, who's done incredible work in the school, both abroad but also at TMU, to try and drive more belief in video games. And aligning our two specializations to support these activities drives way more success than any solo person could have as well. And in addition to that, in an ecosystem spectrum, you're also going to hear from Scott tomorrow, who does work with the City of Toronto at Destination Toronto to drive all of these events. Things like Mortal Kombat are possible because of the work that he does. And so if you uplift and support all those people, they'll be champions too. And that creates a multiplicative effect greater than the sum of the parts.
I'll jump onto that because the whole reason my program at Bow Valley even exists was because of a similar initiative where you have city-based strategies. And well, I have to say Waterloo is far more than a strategy. You've got a whole freaking commission, which is just insane. But you have Waterloo, you've got Toronto, you've got Vancouver, and a couple other places that are starting to pop up. But the one thing we'll take credit for in Alberta is we're the first province with a provincial esports strategy. And a big reason that came to pass, it was the Alberta Esports Association in collaboration with several major tourism players in Edmonton and Calgary that put that together. A lot of what that document was saying, look at all the cool stuff we have here. It was like, we have BioWare, we have a Safe Trojans varsity program, and this, that, and the other, and just highlighting things that already existed. Sometimes you don't necessarily need to be like a trailblazer creating something of your own, but just by going out and telling other people's stories. And that definitely works in the collegiate space as well. Bow Valley, my associate dean in my department at the Chu School of Business at Bow Valley, that was essentially the whole business case, was look at all this information in the Alberta esports strategy. Certainly we can be a player in this. And so, expand your horizons, I suppose, right? When you're considering your opportunities.
No, that's good. And I think yours and Chris's comments as well kind of reminded me, even though we're in the middle of our panel right now, I want to take a step back and really assess and summarize the actual advantages of collaborating with Collegiate, because I think there's a lot of people in the audience who are maybe not directly involved in Collegiate, but are maybe working in the government or working in agencies or working in other areas of the esports industry that probably could benefit from working with the students and the colleges that do these kinds of programs. And so what exactly are the advantages of collaborating with Collegiate, and maybe what unique strengths does Collegiate bring to the table?
It's a wonderful sandbox. There's a lot of students who want to get their opportunity to work with the panel that was just up here about events. And some of the easiest ways to make it happen is to volunteer and be at events. We can test things out in the collegiate space a little bit easier than somebody who's in a private company that needs to generate profit, not just, cost recovery, which is kind of like our business in most cases, is just making sure we cover our day-to-day costs. If we make some profit, it's great. But it's not an expectation, at least on our side with the athletics and rec division. But you also have access to so many students, and we're learning so much about our students through esports and who's coming and engaging with our esports hub and who's signing up for different programs and where they're from. So it's just step by step, just play in that sandbox and try new things and work.
I love that, because oftentimes the way I kind of legitimize or justify the existence of collegiate esports programs is that when you run it as a student service, it can afford to run as a loss. And not to say that that's a safety net that you should kind of lean on, but more so that, because you don't have that pressure constantly to profit, you can experiment with things, you can try things, and that means you can allow students to be at the helm of, a variety of your initiatives and to try and to fail and to learn from those things. The other benefit kind of off to the side of that, it's a captive audience, which is kind of a really good thing in today's world, where it's really hard to get people's attention. Is when kids go to school, they're there every day. If it's K to 12, they're there from 8 in the morning until 4 p.m. every day. And these are people that you can work with and provide programming for, and activate in a variety of different ways, and esports just happens to be one of the best ways to do that. At the college level, it's similar. You have spaces where people are passing through, so sponsorship is really there's convenient ways to integrate sponsorship into your programming, and I think sometimes we don't appreciate the value of having these centralized spaces, these high traffic spaces of young, motivated people that are just craving something to do. And I think what esports does is it really provides for that, and it creates new opportunities for that. I think schools that are able to either build facilities or leverage the facilities that they already have and create additional opportunities for engagement are really starting to benefit from all of those things.
Esports is one of the most, if not the most, multidisciplinary entertainment industries that has ever existed. If you're a secondary or post-secondary institution that is interested in doing work in esports, it almost doesn't matter what your specializations as a school are. There are integrations for your school to get into esports. And you're like, that's a bold statement, Jeff. Well, explain. If you're doing media production, it's obvious. Twitch streaming, all those numbers that I started with, that's the bingo free space. But something that came up earlier was the discussion of things like this colloquialized esports winter. That's business. The entrepreneurial element of understanding the investment systems that lead to things like an esports winter are important and critical levers that you have to be able to wrap your head around if you want to be an entrepreneur in the space. There are massive conflicts almost annually around player representation and unionization in the esports world. That's law. Then you start getting into player sports science, nutrition, all the things you were talking about ensuring a healthy lifestyle and balance. Most professional esports teams have mental health coaches. They have on-staff nutritionists. There's an incredible documentary on the legendary League of Legends team T1's nutritionist chef who does all of the content for them that came out during Worlds last year. It's an incredible watch. But that means that you're dealing with all of the elements of sports, all of the elements of video games, which also includes IT and network security and all those things, broadcast, and then the competitive video game play as well. So there's a huge, to your point of a sandbox, playground within which for the programs to offer real programming that generates the revenue that can justify operating at a loss.
Yeah, it's really not operating at a loss when you frame it like that, right? I think sometimes I use that terminology because oftentimes that's how it's reflected in a budget line, right? Is here's this whatever number of $1,000 going into this esports lab, and you're not seeing that value come out. But the value is the student experience and the learning opportunity and the quality of the graduates that you output into the workforce when their time is done at your institution.
Your number one goal as a school is usually recruitment, because you want to be able to teach as many students as you can to the best degree that you can. So if you can show that how esports has curricular alignment, that will directly play into recruitment.
And keeping this in mind with, I know recently Canada, at least, there's been restrictions for international student visas, if some of you aren't aware. Has that impacted your programs at all? Like, have you addressed this and maybe like having this happen and also the famed esports winter at the same time? Like, have you addressed that at all, or have you like adapted to this in your programs?
I'm sure I speak for all of us that it's going to. If it hasn't already affected us, it's going to. And yeah, we're seeing it too. And that's why there's that important aspect of getting out there in your community and engaging within your community. That's why we have that partnership with the Waterloo Catholic District School Board. And we're offering them opportunities to work with us and hosting events using our hub, and not charging them for them, bringing the students to come for that and say, this is what we have to offer, giving them the professional development experience. We have dual credit programs with them as well now in their high school program. So their students are already coming to our classes for credits for the esports program or for other creative industry programs that we have. So we're getting out there and we're, pounding the pavement, for lack of a better term, to work within our region. And we want regional people as much as we want, global audiences to come into our school, but you got to water your own grass.
Very quickly to agree with you. Ultimately, during the keynote, I included that statement from the Ontario universities that talked about the potential impact. most of the time, this takes time to manifest. And so it is a challenge that is oncoming. That statement really dives into how it's really going to start manifesting next year. Schools will begin to feel that. So making forward progress, being proactive in the ways you described, that's what's super helpful.
I think the short answer is yes, it's going to affect us. But I think what esports does is it allows you to connect with a domestic audience that honestly, unless they're just going to their local school or the school that their parents went to, it gives them a driver to consider options outside of their borders. One of the cooler things that happened at Kiena was my opportunity, or the ability that I had as a varsity recruiter in that role. I no longer do that at Bow Valley, but in that role to coordinate with students from all across the globe. And so I had kids traveling from London, England to Fort McMurray, Alberta to play video games, because those opportunities were not available for them in London, England. And I think when you're able to share those stories with school administrators, they really start to see that this is, a little bit more than just a gaming club. This is a life-changing opportunity for students to, really invest themselves in something. And going back to some of the themes we talked about with the social emotional components to all of this, one thing that's, I think sometimes overlooked is that the kids that play for your esports teams are not playing on your basketball team or your football team. They're not in band. They're not, potentially involved in any other extracurriculars. And so a comment we heard at the high school Super Smash Brothers tournament we hosted at Bow Valley a couple of weekends ago was that one of the kids said, "This is the first time I've ever gotten to wear my school's jersey." And that carries to the collegiate level as well. And so being able to have those opportunities provided and to be a school that gives that opportunity for students is incredibly compelling. And furthermore, they're popping up all over the place. So get in fast, because schools are popping up with these sports programs all over the time, or all over the place now. And so a lot of the first adopters, I think, that were in esports early, like 2017, 2018, they're going to be primed and ready for this a lot more than some of the other schools are.
Absolutely. And I think I want to touch on the regional aspect you mentioned, because I think it would be a mistake if I didn't address Canadian collegiate specifically. Compared to the US, I would say, at least from my perspective as a current student, that it feels like there is more connection and collaboration within even just a circuit sense in the States as opposed to Canada. I'm not sure if you maybe agree or disagree. I'd be more than welcome to hear. How can we work on building, crossing these gaps, I guess, geographically, and building these bridges as a Canadian community?
I'll start with this one because when I previously volunteered with Esports Canada's post-secondary board, this was something that came up a lot, was the idea of doing, an online league for Canada. We talked about NACE earlier, the National Association of Collegiate Esports, but it's kind of a misnomer because it's an American league that's owned by or housed under the NAIA. It's all American owned, it's all American operated, and the significant majority of the population that competes in these leagues is American. In our division in NACE, and for the league team I coach right now at Bow Valley, there's one other school from Alberta, and everyone else we play is Oklahoma or Minnesota or what have you. And so it's kind of tough not seeing Canadian representation. I do think part of it is just a population problem. We don't have enough schools, and those schools don't have enough teams, and the skill caliber of those teams doesn't always necessarily align. And so I think sometimes trying to force Canadian competitions, I used to run a intercollegiate competition in Alberta, and you'd have two schools that were pretty good, and then everyone else was whoever showed up that day on campus. And that doesn't make for a great sporting event either. So I do think that it's a direction that we should consider moving towards. I'm also hesitant to say that it's the right call right now. I see Chris shaking his head, yes. As Chris says, water your own grass. And I think the more that schools invest in their own resources and getting their own teams off the ground, the easier it will be to find those opportunities later. But I think spreading ourselves thin right now and trying to focus on all this, these collaborative events can actually at times make it more challenging to highlight the individual skill and talent on each campus.
It's a bit crass, but it is a real thing to consider, is when we talk about doing these programs. I agree with everything you said. It is essential that these kinds of competitions are built over time and they happen. But they will take time, because a factor that has come up many times around these is, especially if these are going to be nonprofit organizations for tournaments, where is that financial support coming from? If the schools need to uplift it and volunteer their time, then you get into issues of spreading yourself thin, exactly to your point. And if it's going to be that there's an independent organization that's going to be created in order to run these tournaments, then who's going to run that? How are they going to spend that time? Where is that skill set coming from? Are the people donating their time? And if so, where are they being spread thin from? And so without a uniform support framework that's agreed upon by every participating province that likely would need at that point federal support in order to drive, because you would need to be able to fund competitions, web hosting, the branding. How are you going to report the nonprofit activity if it's going to be a nonprofit? Creates a litany of challenges around those organizations that often gets not ignored, but is less important than the joy of the idea of being able to, because I agree, it would be awesome. And there are many efforts that have been made to do that. And often a lot of the efforts in order to justify it end up being privately run organizations. And those are good too. I don't want to say that those are bad. They're great, but they have different imperatives and they have different goals than what an ideal, sort of provincial collegiate or national collegiate competition ideally should or would be.
I'd say for me, I'm gonna say on the side, like I'm all for the international competition right now, as much as I love the opportunity to compete and have really good teams in Canada at the moment. One of the coolest thing is being able to actually compete against American colleges and universities that are Division I or whatever they are. It's actually how a lot of schools are getting buy-in from their administrators or their executives or whatever they are, because they get to go home and say, hey, we beat, I don't know, IU or Syracuse, whatever.
They don't like that so much, when we start posting that we're beating like Michigan State and whatnot, they get a little upset about that. They get upset because
the little Canadian schools are beating their big D1 schools. I love the fact that there's the opportunity for that. We're not quite there yet, obviously, in Canada, like they both kind of said. It will come, but there's also, beyond all of this, there's a pipeline problem right now that needs to be established, and we need to come back to the whole, the traditional sports model. You play club sport, you go to high school, you play high school sport and club sport, then you go to university and you play university sport. Maybe you go pro or you go into the industry somehow, and then after that you retire and then you become an analyst or you have other job opportunities. There's so much, and we're just talking on the competitive side right now. Forget the job side, because there's beyond that, and we have all the educational programs between all of our schools for that too. But there's so much development that needs to happen, and the collegiate space is so young. And I think we've had the opportunity to learn from I don't like the word failures, but I'm going to say it, the failures of the professional scene. So it's coming. We've got great people in this room in the collegiate space that are doing really cool things and very different things. But it's going to take still some time before we have a big Canadian collegiate esports event. And hopefully it'll be with this or something like that in the future.
I would only agree to say as well, to your point from before, yes, there's a huge groundswell of schools that are coming, but most schools are still like maybe not negative $1 million, but they're like negative 500,000. A lot of those schools need to also establish themselves fully in before they're ready to compete too.
Yeah, I was a little worried about opening a giant can of worms about the whole like skill development talent pipeline conversation, because I think you talked about that traditional sports model, and I think there's a number of people out there that have their own perspectives on that. I think what I'll say to kind of round out the whole Canada versus the United States at the college level conversation is that one of the unique benefits we have in esports that our traditional sports friends will never have is that we are not restricted by travel. We're not restricted by, being physically in the same place to compete. And that means that we get to play the best competition wherever it may be. And from a development perspective, the only way to get better as a player is to play people that are better than you, right? And so I think, we're almost using the Americans as a launch pad, as a stepping stone, right? Like we'll go beat their good solo queue players, and then we'll build our good teams here, and then we'll recruit new kids to our teams. And I think that's actually for the best in the long run, is to not artificially create barriers around geography for competition just for the sake of national pride or what have you.
That's great. Yeah, and I think but all your comments on this like pipeline development are a great segue into my last question before I let you all kind of pitch your schools and whatnot, as well as go into audience Q&A. Is where does Collegiate need the most support right now? Like, what is next for Collegiate or like Scholastic Esports as well, and like, what do you see as our biggest thing to like develop on? I guess moving forward. I know it's a big question.
So I would say it's two things really, and the first one is really to agree with what you actually just said. Is a really big thing that needs to be that schools can stand to work on and will benefit from working on is tied to a previous conversation we had about all these programs that you can attach to. The competitive play also needs to have that so what? It needs to have the talent development pipeline. If you're going to be putting all this time and effort into these collegiate competitions, there's one layer for it to be extracurricular and developmental. That's great. Genuinely. That's amazing. But for many students who are incredibly talented at these games, there is a very toxic choice that they are forced to make in many cases, or used to be forced to make. Back in the day, in even 2015, 2012 era, it was if you wanted to go pro, you had to play 18 hours a day. So the decision was go pro or go to university. Universities need to be able to answer the question of how a very talented, brilliant student can go pro. And universities have to be the preferable option to go pro in the same way that something like the NCAA in the US is the way you go pro in basketball. That's got to be the first answer. Beyond that, the biggest thing that schools can stand to do is really understand, again, pertinent to a previous conversation, the idea that esports is an effective recruitment tool and how to integrate it more effectively in with academia, that it's not a side activity that students do when they're not doing classes.
I really appreciate that that first point, because while we can debate until the end of the earth whether it makes the most sense for esport players to go to college or not, or whether Scholastic and Collegiate are necessary steps in that pathway to pro pipeline, I think what we're finding is that while you might have really talented players in the pro and tier one space, and Chris, if I say something off, you have all full authority to tell me to shut up. But my understanding, he's got his mic ready. My understanding is that, or my belief, I should say, is that regardless of your talent as a player, there's certain elements of your maturity, of your ability to interact with others, of your ability to work and function in a team environment, to be legally responsible for yourself. Like, you have kids that are 14 years old going pro in Rocket League. They don't know anything about what they're doing beyond playing their game. And so I think from that perspective and that perspective alone, there's enough justification that Collegiate should be an integral part of that pathway to pro. Maryville University has done that phenomenally well for their League of Legends and Overwatch programs historically. We've seen schools like the University of St. Thomas, even St. Clair College here in Canada has graduated some pro or recruited some pro level talent, and so I would wholeheartedly agree with that. If I was to add my own kind of perspective or comment, and Spencer Clark shared this previously and will probably continue to do so if you talk to him, is that esports comes at a cost. There is a cost to the things that you do, and that people at work deserve to get paid for the work that they do. And I think oftentimes college administrators might look at esports and say, hey, I don't have to spend $600,000 a year on travel. This is great. I can just give them $500 and tell them to go have fun. No, well, there's a couple other things you have to consider. There's staffing and facilities and equipment. And I think the more that people are educated on those things, and of course, the more that we can highlight the ROI through things like recruitment and retention and branding and all of those other benefits that sports kind of gets a free pass on, and showing that those things are true for esports as well, it'll all help itself out in the long run.
So one external would be we need publisher support, which we don't have currently in most cases. And I mean, there's a little bit of support with different games. But in order to establish this pipeline that I was talking about, we need to have the publishers understand, and we need some people to talk about what you just said. I love it. 14-year-old kid trying to, sign to my Rocket League team years ago saying that they deserve, a $5,000 a month salary because that's what FaZe is making or whatever else it is. True conversations. It's going to take, again, time for all of this. And I think with all of the colleges that are building programs and all of the different leagues and what they're working on, it will come. And the other thing that we can all do as collegiate institutes, and it goes back to, I think, the first panel is the storytelling aspect of it. We need to start telling stories about what we're doing in our colleges, less about what the administrators are doing, because I see way too many administrators or managers or directors in front of the camera. And as important as we are, we're there for the students. We offer a student service. We need to talk about the students. And again, I said it earlier, it's the before, the after, or sorry, the before, the during, and the after, their whole journey through the collegiate space. What programs, I want to see on a stream that any of us are doing, introduce your players, say what their real name is, not just their gamer tag, what program they're taking, what year they're in, and any of their academic accolades. We just don't see enough of it. We're going to try to do a really good job this year with our award ceremony that we're about to host, broadcasting it online and just showcasing like the students. The other thing about another need that's a negative need is we need to get rid of all of these award ceremonies that are all through all of the different leagues that we have. And if we are going to keep awards, the awards should be, again, going to students and not to directors and maybe to a program. That programs are doing good things, but it's too much of an ego thing for when it comes to awards. So that's my one negative.
We also need more events like this one. We need conferences like this to keep going and keep growing and keep having people up on stage having this discourse, because this is another vector of how you don't rationalize someone out of a position they didn't rationalize themselves into. This is the opportunity to share that insight and that wisdom from these guys who've done this stuff and showcase how it's possible and what can be possible to then have more champions, because this is another great vector by which champions come up.
That's great. Thank you all. So really quickly, before we dive into some audience questions, I want to give you all maybe like 3 minutes to like elevator pitch and share a bit about your program. So that could be anything really.
Only get 1 minute because you just had 15 minutes.
That seems fair.
You get 30 seconds.
Yeah. Yes. So it can be anything really, maybe like what you're doing next, some like big events, of course, like what's ahead for you guys, like any real like big accomplishments, anything you want to share, really. So take it away.
I'll get mine out of the way. I'll leave forward to you guys. That way I'm done and I'm out of here. So I've been really privileged to get to help out a lot of schools and work with a lot of institutions. I focused a lot of what I talked on today with the big successes, a lot of which have happened downtown in Toronto. I've also got the privilege of having taught at Humber College. I'll be teaching with them again for a short period coming up, and they do amazing stuff as well. I've also had a lot of privilege to get to work with Algonquin College in Ottawa as well. And so there's a lot of different cool vectors by which at a collegiate level, be it through the music program I'm about to teach at, through the broadcast program that they have at Algonquin College, at a college level where these opportunities are great from an educational standpoint. At TMU, the biggest thing that's coming is there's a lot of support and a lot of groundswell coming, because this summer we have the privilege of hosting the Valorant Masters Toronto, which will be a massive event. The tickets sold out, I believe, in less than 3 minutes, though I might be wrong about that. They sold out fast. And it's going to be an immense, huge groundswell for the whole country in terms of what kind of hype can come from an event that comes to Canada. And the hope is that that will drive a lot of support for events around the world, or around Canada. Yeah.
That's another
preferably.
need. You'll need more events.
Yes.
But you said that.
That's it. That's all I got.
Awesome. I guess Conestoga College, we're about to open up a 10,000 square foot audience first arena, a 400 seat facility. It kind of duels as a classroom during the day. And then we've got the gaming floor that students can come and drop in. We also currently have a 3,000 square foot hub in the same campus. So we'll have, 110 gaming PCs in our space, 2 production rooms, VR and iRacing simulator room, analysts and casting booth. We're also advancing with at least 1 more hub in another campus. Hopefully by the end of 2028, we'll have 5 total hubs, or plus the arena. Along with that, the other 3 important pieces that we have at our college is our media, our events that we're hosting for ourselves or third-party events within the region. And then lastly is our teams. And not lastly, it's just the last pillar I'm talking about. But our competitive teams are obviously the driver for that recruitment. And then everything else we do, all of our students work inside the hub. There's work integrated learning. There's, real life, tangible things that are happening every single day in our space. And when you come into any of our Conestoga esports hubs, there's students that are supporting and running with the help of administrators or support staff that are full-time. And then I guess to the event part, yeah, we're going to have the Toronto Ultra. Well, I guess it's not the Toronto Ultra. It's the COD champs are coming to Kitchener in the summer. And again, event volunteers, our students are going to have the opportunity to volunteer at a world-class event. It's around, I think it's the same weekend as back to back. And they'll be in the room and learning how to operate with OAM, and you've had the experience, and it's going to be a good time for them.
That's tough to follow that. Bow Valley's program is brand spanking new. We opened our facility in October, much to the generosity of the City of Calgary and the Calgary Economic Development through the Opportunity Calgary Investment Fund. We received $5.5 million in funding from the city to launch our facility, our varsity, and our recreational programs, which is pretty neat. And so we've got our esports arena now with upwards of 40 computer stations, 6 console stations, 2 sim racing stations, a private practice room for our teams, as well as a state-of-the-art broadcast space. And so the opportunities for students on campus are phenomenal. But furthermore, and more specifically to my job, we launched our esports business management program diploma about 3 semesters ago, so January of 2024. And so now we're taking esports by the horns with varsity programming, recreational programming, as well as academic programming. And much to Chris's point, at the risk of beating a dead horse, we have students doing everything, right? So you've got my students are volunteering, my students are playing on teams, running events, and in our final semester, students will complete a capstone assignment with an industry partner where they'll run an event in our esports arena. And so, really focusing on a lot of the things that these gentlemen have shared already, bringing events to campus and highlighting students. So it's been really, I've been really grateful to be a part of that journey and that development.
If you need volunteers, call all our students.
Call our students.
No,
all our students.
Our.
We're integrative.
Our students, yes.
Integrative collaboration.
A collective of students. How wonderful. Thank you all for sharing. I want to open the floor now for any questions from the audience. Yeah, go ahead.
So I was wondering, apart from athletic development and event production and broadcasting, are students getting involved or showing interest on the business side of and how, can you share some examples of how they are getting involved on the business aspect?
I'll start with that. So there's a gentleman hiding in the back of the room there by the name of Ryan, who runs our digital accelerator program at the college. And so the whole idea of the accelerator program is it's kind of like an incubator offered through the college. It's not reserved for Bow Valley students. However, we do market it pretty aggressively to them. And so students in my program, I think I've got 1 or 2 that have reached out to Ryan about taking their own startup ideas through the accelerator and building and designing their own gaming or esports related businesses. And so it does require a bit more of a firmer hand, I think. I think it can sometimes be tricky to do the full entrepreneurial journey and, the scope of a classroom, but focused programming like what we're offering in that sense has been very motivating. I've actually had the opportunity to go through the accelerator. It was really valuable for me. So there is interest, but I think it to cater the kind of talent that you would need for them to be successful out in the workplace requires a kind and gentle hand, and maybe more so than what can be provided through traditional academic programming.
I have 1 student right now in the course I'm teaching in our esports event and production program, who's very interested in the business side of things. He's planning on running his own event in our hub, but the pitch that I've asked him to provide is, if you want to run this, you have to first off pitch it to us as administrators, come to a classroom and put your presentation up and show us how this is going to work, how many students you're going to bring or how many people you're going to bring to the event. And I want to see some kind of a profit and loss statement and what you need from us to provide to you. What's the value you're bringing to us, and back and forth. So it's going to take time. We do have a School of Business program that is offered through the School of Business, and we're seeing a little bit of students coming in from that with the interest of esports development. I try to tell everyone who comes into my classroom, please don't tell me you want to start an organization. It's a different conversation. Catch me at the bar if you want that story. But it is coming. But a lot of right now, there's the students that are mostly interested in like the production side of things, and less so actually like going pro, which is my favorite thing to hear too. So.
At TMU, they have the Ted Rogers School of Management, which is one of the better business schools within the entire Canadian region. And they run a thing called Special Topics of Interest every year, which are sort of half credit, 6-week courses. They've been very generous in allowing me and my madness into their program for multiple years concurrently now to do a 6-week intensive on the ecosystem of esports business for MBA students, which has been a blast. And both years I've gotten to run it, the class was maxed out. And we had students in every single week who were very interested in learning about the ecosystem. And one of the things that I would do in order to really drive that learning home is bring in special guests every week to come in and talk to them. So we've had the CEO of Blacklight come in. We had the COO of Overactive Media come in to talk to them. We've had Scott Ventresca come in and talk to them and blow their minds with talk about how you actually drive events into the city as someone from a tourism destination team. All of that to say that what we do is I don't just tell them the ecosystem. We then would have guests come in who are in business positions within the esports industry to explain to them the levers and the vectors that affect them in fireside chat Q&A approaches. And they've been amazing guests every time.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. That's a better way of saying what I was trying to explain with the accelerator program is that personalized kind of, you get a smaller room and you're talking to somebody that has that direct industry expertise. I think really speaks to one, to the credibility of the guest, but also to the legitimacy of what they have to offer. And so those special focus kinds of programs are really good at nurturing that kind of talent.
And to that point, and the success that comes from it is there's now students who have gotten that exposure, who are now launching their own businesses, who are working on developing their own approaches. A lot of it still falls into media access businesses because it's that's the element that's developed. That's where investor money is a lot of the time. It's hard to build, and there are some great success stories of people who have done this in Canada, who have built physical health training programs, things like that. But in general, a lot of the investor money still understands esports as a broadcast media. And so a lot of the entrepreneurial businesses that have started are in that vein, but it is a growing interest. And it's really about convincing the people who are in positions of business that they should be teaching these students.
That's great. Thank you. As a personal student who is also interested in esports business specifically, that's always really good to hear. Awesome. Any other audience questions? Yeah, in the back in white.
Me? Yep. I was curious, you were mentioning a bit about the lack of region restrictions in esports, not getting to travel and stuff. So what do you think about the paying disadvantages of being in Canada? Because some games are so hard to play, especially if most of the NA servers are in the US.
So I'll start on this because I think coping about hardware and ping is fake. My players do it all the time. My keyboard is only capping at 240 or my monitor is at 248 hertz and not 280 hertz, and that's why I'm losing. No, you're losing because you're worse than them. I think league players are a different beast, I swear. I think that there's a certain level of play where the difference between 40 ping and 20 ping makes a significant difference. On average, I do not feel that the significant majority of collegiate esports programs are suffering because of minute hardware, software, or connectivity issues. I do not think that is true for most programs. Now, that's not to say that my Valorant players enjoy playing their official matches on 70 ping against kids from Illinois that are playing on 15. I do think that there are some challenges, and this goes back to Chris's point about developer support, is that these are things that we have very limited control over as varsity program coaches or administrators. We really are subject to what the developers are willing to offer, and history has shown that up until this point, there really isn't enough justification to build servers in Canadian cities yet. just because of the population needs. Like we can play on Oregon or we can play on Seattle or whatever, and so that's what we do. So you certainly get that kind of commentary and feedback from students about challenges with some of the limitations. But I don't personally see it as an obstacle to your ability to grow or succeed as a program at this time.
I would only say that, add to that to say, it depends on what the objectives of your school are when it comes to the varsity side. If the activation goal is if you're trying to be one of those schools that's going to send kids into tier 1 pro, that is where the only instance where I would diverge from you and say, I agree. For the most part, if it's an activity programming, if it's skill set building, if it's team building, if it's any of those skills, it doesn't matter. And it's not worth spending the enormous amounts of money as a university to build a dedicated pipeline or whatever you're going to do in order to do that. But an anecdote I'll speak to about some students who do have that ambition to go pro, where the ping can matter, was a very brilliant student of ours when we were developing the gaming hub, was the president of the varsity program at the time, a student named Benson, who's gone on to do amazing stuff. We were testing Valorant in the hub at the time, and we just deployed the PCs. And they were running on at the time, brand new hardware, new GPUs, the whole 9 yards. And we were running them all on 2K resolution gaming monitors. He sat down to play, and he played for 1 minute, and then he slid his chair back and said, "This is unplayable." I've been playing it all day. What are you talking about? He said, no, it doesn't work. And it was this moment. There's this great story about how, I won't go on a giant tangent. The short of the long is that at the end of about 3 days of testing, what we found out was that the 2K resolution monitor was creating a dropped frame every 17 seconds, running at 240 frames per second. Benson was able to see that 1 frame per second drop, or that 2 or 3 frames that were dropping. And it was so distracting that it was impacting his gameplay. So it's very important to understand, if you're, and for the school at the time, we had a real competitive goal of we wanted to really max out what students were able to do. And that was kind of the optics we were trying to be going for. So it was important to us specifically for that reason. For the vast majority of schools, and when you don't have students that are trying to play at that ridiculous level and have that degree of ambition of play skill, no, it does not matter, and it's not worth the enormous investments, especially when your schools in, say, Northern Ontario that have a lot of internet connectivity issues, to try and overcome that challenge.
Don't ask me anything about that kind of stuff.
All good. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah. In the blue?
Look, yeah. I have one question, especially around the pipeline that you mentioned, and going from high school to university. And we work a lot with K-12 students, and what I'm really wondering is, if you were to give an advice to a student who is right now in high school looking for an esports program, like what kind of advice would you give to one, find the best program, and to put all the chance to be on their side to be accepted in the program?
I think a lot of kids focus way too much on their solo queue and their ranked play, and not enough on the 9 other things that are significantly more important than your solo queue rank. That being said, again, I think to Jeff's point, it goes back to the type of program you're trying to get into. Some schools are very selective about the types of recruits. I mentioned Maryville earlier. To play for Maryville, they don't even talk to you unless you're in the top 250 on the rank ladder of the game that you want to play. But that's their objective. For the vast majority of schools that do have scholarship programs, it changes from school to school. But if you're, we'll say, slightly above average, approaching elite tier, but have good grades, you have a good brand presence, you're active on social media, and you're not an idiot on social media. That's another important factor there. You do well in scrims, not just as a player, but as a team member and a collaborator. A lot of that stuff speaks a lot more heavily. Again, I do think it depends on the type of school and your ultimate graduation outcomes. If you're trying to go pro, you're going to have to be, top of your game. But again, I think for the significant majority of schools, if you are an above average player that focuses on other things like your GPA, your program of selection, your quality of character, that goes a lot farther than, that extra 50 MMR you're going to gain by grinding ranked all weekend, right?
I'm going to go with the side of making sure that they're picking a school that has a program that they actually want to get into. Nothing to do with the competitive esports side. That's just, again, they're coming. There's lots of them. So making sure they're doing their research on where they want to go in the esports sector, if that's where they're coming. The key thing that they need to remember, especially for a program like ours that has varsity, is they are a student athlete. What word comes first? Student. So if they're not doing well in class, you're not starting your game. If you go into academic probation, you're being dropped from the team or whatever it is. So ensuring that they pick the program that they want to go to, and then the bonus of you have an esports facility, you have a team, you have all the stuff, that's secondary. So I'm on the education side of this conversation.
What they said.
Just a funny anecdote. I got a message from a kid the other day on Discord, because I'm very active. Most of us in this room that work in esports are quite active on that space, and so I get a lot of messages from students on social media channels like Discord. And he messaged me and said, "Hey, can I get a scholarship to play League of Legends?" That was the opening line, and I said, "No, sorry, we don't have a scholarship program at this time." And his follow-up message was, "Oh, do you know of any other schools that do?" And so like to Chris's point, it's like you're coming to school. Like, it's not just getting paid to play video games, like you're going to school. And I think if you don't treat that with the proper dignity that it deserves, you're not going to be successful in that environment anyways. And I think that can be challenging for a lot of kids to wrap their head around. I think a lot of kids are at that point right now where it's like, I can't go pro, but maybe I can get paid collegiate scholarship money, and there's education on all sides that really needs to happen, and people need to become a lot more aware of what it is they're actually signing up for when they sign a agreement to pay tuition for 4 years to an institution, right?
And then educating them to learn that your scholarship gets paid out at the end of the term, not at the beginning of the term. So you have to hit your KPIs to go back in order to unlock that scholarship that's been offered or available to you. So lots to go over. But we can have a 3-day panel on this.
Okay, I think I can take one more question. Yeah.
Mike Turner from Unity on the multiplay side. I was just wondering, do you guys just have, is it just the student athletes like esports people, or do you also have like shoutcasters and video editors, social?
All of the above, yeah.
Yeah.
And then so you have specific roles that you're trying to fill out your team of.
Yeah, so the way our school handles it specifically is our varsity players are recruited. This is another, again, it's so hard to talk about this without going in a million different directions. Esports programs are owned by different kind of departments within the college, and so ours is student services, Chris's is athletics.
Mixture of ours is incredibly complicated. It's a mixture of student athletics plus one faculty within the school providing material support and resources plus advice from another department.
So that changes a lot of how your staffing is done and developed, because your resourcing is different and whatnot. So in our case, our student services team, which is our varsity program, they recruit the varsity students, they pay out the honorariums or soon to be scholarship programs and whatnot. And then other students are brought on from a variety of different departments, be it faculty like mine, as volunteers or whatnot for course credit or what have you. So it depends on kind of like the administrative structure of your program. But to answer the kind of simple general question, yes, a varsity esports program will include far more than just the players. You'll build in your staff as well.
We have 4 full-time staff members in our esports department. So we've got myself as a manager. We have Zach, who's the operations supervisor, Addie, who's our media coordinator, and then Yuri, who's our facility coordinator. And then they each have kind of like an org chart of students who work under them for hub leads for our facility, production or content creators for production and content creation. We've got a few showcasters who have volunteered through different, actually not volunteered, they're paid. All of our students are paid through their different departments or schools of. And then there's one more. We have an esports event coordinator who is runs all of our satellite campus events, where we're doing like pop-up events and talking about our program and what we're doing on the esports side. So we're lucky enough to have a well-paid group of students and staff at our college.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, I've kept you all here long enough. I encourage if anyone else has any questions, hunt these people down afterwards. After the
Yeah,
panel,
bring it.
or at the
We'll be
bar.
on the homies.
Yes, I encourage you all to continue asking questions. Thank you so much. Could I get a round of applause, please, for these lovely professors?